In our study of the synthesis of yoga, we saw in the previous chapter the big picture of the cosmos, the planes of consciousness, the physical world, vital world, mental world, and worlds above, all of which have their representation within the individual human being, where we have a physical sheath, a vital sheath, and a mental sheath, and the still higher ranges which are not yet organized within us. And this lower triple range of sheaths has its corresponding inner connection to the worlds, but the three sheaths are tightly bound. Our senses are plugged into the physical sheath, and our entire attention is fixated on the physical body and the material domain. The result is we are not aware of all that happens on those higher gradations, through those higher sheaths, and in fact, we are constantly in exchange, in interchange on those levels with enormous implications to our individual life and our collective life, but of which we are not at all conscious. With that background, we have entered the new chapter, the lower triple Purusha, where Sri Aurobindo is showing us how we can become conscious of all that. And in the next chapter, how we can rise further towards the still higher ranges. So, this lower triple Purusha deals with our consciousness as it first emerges out of this identification with the gross physical body, rises or can rise into an awareness of the vital sheaths and become conscious of the vital worlds, and then rise further into the mental sheath and becoming conscious of the mental worlds. How is this ascent to take place? And in the portion we have already read, he showed how the normal human experience begins with this fixation of the physical world, and consciousness appears almost like a superficial experience or an accidental appearance. And because we are a soul and not merely a body, we cannot remain satisfied in this superficial life, which is the first experience of the human being. Because the soul knows infinity and knows its immortality, the sense of these things leaks out from within, and we have glimpses or as if a call towards these things and a seeking which eventually grows. But we realize very quickly that having experienced or acquired knowledge of the material world extensively, nothing is explained of these inner and higher parts of us. And so he says, a very important idea, that That is the reason why an age of strong materialism and skepticism is always followed by an age of occultism, of mystical creeds, of new religions, and profounder seekings after the infinite and the divine. Because you've exhausted the material domain, and then you realize nothing is known, nothing is truly known or explained. And there is this turn within powerfully. But we saw also how the religious seeking can only lead you so far. It gives you a first entry, but it does not bring the clarity and the full access to these inner and higher possibilities. But behind the religious forms is the deeper knowledge of which religion is a symbol. And it is there that we come into the domain of what we have described as an esoteric yoga, for which the religion could be a first entry. And then he says that what science does for our knowledge of the material world, replacing appearances by a deeper knowledge, the same thing yoga does for the religious first opening. What religious showed you as vague possibilities, yoga gives you now a direct, deeper, inner, not only knowledge, but a technology and a possibility for a mastery. And so the yoga itself, although aiming at the highest divine realization, from that highest must turn back to embrace everything below. This is where we were in our study, that in this turning back, as it embraces all the lower ranges of consciousness, there are two aspects to this embracement. There is the possession of our lower self in consciousness, all the way down to the most physical. And then there is the possession of the workings of nature, which belongs to each of these levels of consciousness, all the way out into the universe. And so these represent two sides of the knowledge which has to be re embraced by this descending movement of the spiritual consciousness as it turns to unify with the lower ranges. Now we come to the part where he explains how the human experience begins with the soul as it is bound in the physical body. In the Upanishadic tradition, there is a reference to fivefold soul of man, of which the first is the soul that is physical. You experience yourself as if formed of body or of the nature or density of a material domain, and this fills everything of our experience. In this, life comes, mind grows, but they seem to be superimposed. You do not know the vital world or the life plane directly. You do not know the mental planes directly. You know only their derivative operation in the material consciousness, in the physical body. And he says it is this dominance of our mental and vital parts by the body which justifies the initial appearance that mind is a product of your brain. But in fact, he says the entire subjection of mind and life to the body is characteristic of an undeveloped humanity. We saw last time what happens at that stage of humanity, that even after we leave the physical body, the consciousness withdraws to inner ranges corresponding to a grade very close to the physical domain, comes back, re enters the physical life in the new birth, goes back, but does not have access to the higher ranges of even the vital or the mental worlds. For that, you have to grow in consciousness, even in your physical body and existence, develop the consciousness of your vital and mental ranges and be able to sufficiently rise into them, being free of this exaggerated identification with the physical body. And it is only then that as you leave the body, you are able to enter those higher ranges of the vital or the mental. And the important idea, as you come back to take birth, you come back with a freer consciousness, which can now be infused into the new body that you take. And it is this idea which he will develop further in the paragraph that we now take up. All this earlier was the description of an undeveloped humanity, which has not emerged out of this identification with the physical body. A more developed humanity allows us to make a better and freer use of all the capacities and experiences that we derive from the vital and mental planes of being. To lean more for support upon these hidden planes, be less absorbed by the physical, and to govern and modify the original nature of the physical being by greater vital forces and powers from the desire world, and the greater and subtler mental forces and powers from the psychical and intellectual planes. By this development, we are able to rise to higher altitudes of the intermediary existence between death and rebirth, and to make a better and more rapid use of rebirth itself for a yet higher mental and spiritual development. This is where we had paused last time. So the idea is that the real evolution is taking place here in the physical world, in the physical body, where you have to make the necessary effort to rise into mental consciousness while still being in the physical domain. As a result of that, you have access now to the mental planes as you leave the physical body. If you did not make that effort and you remained largely bound to the physical existence itself, as you shed the body, you remain in that domain of ranges, subtler ranges of the physical world itself. While in those states, you have no access to the vital or the mental planes. They seem to be entirely different. It is only in the physical body that you have the mix of the vital and mental consciousness embedded in the physical, and therefore an evolution becomes possible. This is a very important concept to retain, because the worlds as they are in the cosmos each represent a grade of substance, a grade of consciousness. But from one to the next, the difference can be so great that there is nothing in this substance or consciousness that may have a direct access or experience of a completely different grade. But here in the physical body, where in the physical sheath itself the mental and vital sheaths have been joined, you have the potential experience of other gradations of consciousness. It is out of this that a still higher spiritual consciousness can also as if awaken. And so the evolutionary process of a new consciousness emerging from a lower is available only in the physical incarnation. Knocked out from the physical body, you stay at the grade of consciousness you have currently evolved into. Coming back into the body, you have access now to the full range of these powers of consciousness, because as if all the worlds have leaned to join to form this physical substance and life and mind. So, this is the reason why you will find in the traditions this very unusual statement that even the gods have to take birth in a human form if they want to evolve beyond their typal nature, beyond the range, the band of consciousness to which they normally belong. But here, having acquired this flexibility and continuity of access within your consciousness, left freed from the physical body, you have the full range which is accessible to you. Of course, you would tend to be in the regions which are more plastic, more free, more wide, because it's suffocating to go down into the lower gradations of the vital or even the lower mental ranges. But the idea is that this change, this evolution, is primarily the domain of a physical incarnation. And yet, having grown to a higher gradation in consciousness, when you have access to that plane, now freed from the physical body, you have access to its wideness, its universality. When you come to incarnate again, you bring something of that wideness, something of that freer, suppler, clearer gradation of consciousness, which you now infuse into the physical body. So the benefit is that in the physical incarnation, having grown, you have access to a higher plane. But while incarnating now, you can bring a power of that higher plane into the new body, and you see the importance of both. It's not merely in the physical plane that the evolution will take place. You will also have, after leaving the physical body, access to a wider power of the current consciousness to infuse into this. So, from the soul's perspective, there is a double ascent. There is the consciousness which rises, and then there is the corresponding gradation of what we have called nature or power of consciousness, energy of consciousness, which is what makes for these worlds. This also grows along with this. We are aware indeed of the life plane and mind plane of the physical being, but not of the life plane and mind plane proper, or the superior and larger vital and mental being which we are behind the veil of our ordinary consciousness. So, this is the problem of this embodied incarnation, that you experience the life force in the body, you experience mind in the body. So, this he describes as life plane and mind plane of the physical being. The part of the physical consciousness opening out to life plane, opening out to mind plane, and as if formed of the physical or embedded in the physical. You cannot separate it. Can you, for example, separate your mind from your body? You seem as if to have your mind always fixed here where the body is. Or you have something like a daydream in which the mind seems to wander into its own space. But if someone wakes you with a shock from your daydream, you find you are right back here. You do not find yourself hanging out there somewhere. The equivalent experience of a freed mental consciousness would be that you actually step out of the physical body and you wander out in your mental body. And when someone wakes you up, you are conscious that you come back in your mental body and rejoin with the physical body. Can we create the separation of the mental consciousness to such a degree that it actually can live separately from the physical body and can have an experience of the mental world independent of the physical body? So, this is what we will see in the next paragraphs, how to do this. And second, he says, it's not enough to be able to have an awareness of the mental plane or the vital plane in themselves. The part of the mental plane that we are within our own inner realms, this also needs to become conscious. So the model is of the physical body, and in the physical body, the vital and mental planes. But the vital part of the physical and the mental part of the physical, as if have a deeper vital range, which belongs to the subtle body proper. That's the proper vital sheath, mental sheath, of which there is a continuity opening out into the universal vital and into the universal mental. So, in the model, as we describe it, there is the physical body with this mental vital mix, and then there is the subtle body in which the fuller access to the vital and the mental worlds and the proper existence in a subtle body separate from the physical body can be had. But here are deep ranges. The full range of your own inner vital and inner mental are there concealed from the surface parts, in which all the real work takes place, all the real potentialities exist, which are still not developed in this physical turning to the vital and mental. So here is the evolution taking place, trying to recover, replicate, organize powers which are already held concealed in the inner mental and the inner vital. So it is as if from inside, a little bit that leaks out now influences this evolutionary struggle and awakes, organizes itself here in the surface parts. For example, all of us have an extraordinary capacity of memory. Left to itself, this extraordinary automatic memory is flawless. It misses nothing, it knows everything. Since the morning that you woke up, as you moved around in your house, everything that your physical senses registered is retained in this inner part of the memory. But if I ask you to remember, did you notice the ant that was crawling around on the wall? I didn't notice it. I was thinking of other things. Did you notice how many breaths you took from the point you woke up to the point you left your house? I didn't count. The surface person here is unaware, but everything that flowed into it through its senses, has been registered in the inner part of the mind. Under hypnosis, we could all be made to recall these trivial details which we never notice. On the other hand, equally in that inner part is access to greater knowledge than merely the memory of what your physical senses registered. There is knowledge also of memory which your subtle senses registered. Or there is access even to memory which is part of the universal memory, what the universe remembers. So our physical person is dependent on your physical senses to register what happens around you. So, if for some reason your eyes are closed, or they don't function too well, or they are defective and you're blind, nothing would have come through the physical sight. But the inner sight, corresponding to the inner subtle body, would have still registered things. And that's still on the level of your personal identity. There is the whole realm of mind which is in the cosmos, and the physical consciousness which is in the cosmos, in which things are being registered, but they are also connected to you on these inner layers. So you could, as if you had the capacity, you could, as if lean into that memory, not only recall the things which you saw through your physical senses, but things you sensed through your subtle senses, and things which were perceived in the universe by the consciousness directly, not needing special formed senses, which only belongs to this surface part. In the subtle body, you do not need to have an organ for listening or seeing. It's one of the very interesting experiences when you're in the subtle body, that you do not see with your physical eyes with the limits placed on it by the eyeballs and the eyelids. You can close your eyes or try to close them, you still see, because the subtle body does not have eyelids which cover the light. Or you notice that you're seeing not just in this very narrow 70 or 80 degrees of sight, but you're actually aware all around. In the subtle body, you are seeing from all parts of your subtle body. The consciousness itself registers through all senses because it does not need specialized organs. It is only in the physical body where everything has been bound in form that the operation of sight needs to be created by a formal process. And if the formed process is damaged, your sight is not functioning. Step out of the physical body, in your subtle body, you're aware everything around you. And of gradations which are much subtler than just the physical. So what he's pointing to here is we are aware indeed of the life plane and mind plane of the physical being, but not of the life plane and mind plane, but not of the life plane and mind plane proper, or of the superior and larger vital and mental being which we are. All of this is not something outside us, it is already us. But that us and this us is separated by a veil. And unless you're able to make that conscious link between these two, all this which you are, not just potentially, but you are right now, but unable to articulate or experience or express or organize in this evolutionary bundle of matter, all that is hidden. And so, this memory which I spoke of is the perfect, automatic, instantaneous memory, and it has access to so much. But your surface mind working has a limited memory dependent on your attention, dependent on your focus, dependent on the instruments and the body. So, you get a knock on the head and you lose memory of the last 20 minutes. Why? Well, it was the memory bound in the biology which could be knocked. But you step back from the physical body and enter the subtle body, all that memory is intact and much more. In fact, we will say that all exercise of remembrance is taking place not in your physical body, but in your mental body, in the subtle body. So you want to remember something, your mind turns to want to remember, and the memory comes out from inside to meet your call. The thing inside had access to the full memories of your whole life. It could call out what was needed according to your call. The implications of this are enormous because you are never conscious of how you draw out a memory. Try to remember what you did, let's say, on the New Year's Eve. Your mind turns to know and the memory comes out. And maybe there are two or three memories which come which might be relevant. You may select. But your consciousness did not have to go back yesterday, day before, in a sequence to get back to that. Who there knew what you're looking for? Who there had access to all this memory? And the implication is that this inner you is conscious of your outer you, is conscious that you are looking for this memory, and therefore, in response to your call, puts out the true memory that you need. But if the gap between that inner putting out the memory and the outer receiving the memory, if the gap between is affected, is clouded, then you say, yes, I think I remember, it slipped my mind. What happened there? There was something in between. It seemed to come out, you agitated, and the gap suddenly broke, the connection broke, and in the gap, you lost it. It's on the tip of my tongue, but it's slipping out. Where is it held? It's in that inner layer with a gap in between. But now imagine what could happen if the gap is removed. Your consciousness now has full conscious access to all this. You turn in to know, and all the knowledge is there. But that power is already within you, separated by this gap. So Sri Aurobindo explains that all that's happening in evolution is that the powers which are already present within us in the inner ranges are as if projected out, or their influence projected out to organize that functioning in your physical, materialized, process bound, structured, formed machinery of body. And this is true equally of intelligence. You say, my IQ, my intelligence is so much, but there are others who are so much more intelligent. But if you cross this boundary, you will find the power of the intelligence is enormously greater. And if you had to convert it into IQ terms, it might hit many hundreds or more. But only a little bit of that power of the true intelligence leaks out to the surface and is organized here. And if you say my intelligence is not sufficiently developed, all that we can say is the gap in between is preventing your true intelligence from being organized and from coming forward. And so there are very simple yogic processes to quiet the mind, to turn within, to draw out or reflect the influence of that inner memory, intelligence, or other operations. And suddenly you have insights, you have understanding which goes well beyond your normal functioning. And then you get upset, you're angry, there's a rush of clouded, agitated energy filling your mind. You lose that intelligence, you lose that memory, you lose that access. And the implications are enormous. If we are conscious that the true operations are already there within us, there is nothing that prevents us from drawing out that potential and organizing it more rapidly and consciously in our surface parts. But the gap between these two has to be bridged. And that is one of the processes of the yoga necessary. So here he's referring to this when he says, the superior and larger vital and mental being which we are behind the veil of our ordinary consciousness. So the yoga, in a sense, has two processes. One is the process to remove the veil, which then opens your narrow individual to this wider, freer, universal consciousness, and on all these three layers. And the other process is the thing which blocks your consciousness from rising higher than where it is currently. So that he describes elsewhere as the lid, which prevents access to the higher ranges of consciousness. So removing the veil and then breaking the lid, or removing or thinning, dissolving the lid. These are the two processes by which your consciousness is liberated from this very narrow identification, which is bound in the physical body. It is only at a high stage of development that we become aware of them. And even then, ordinarily, only at the back of the action of our mentalized physical nature. So, what is the consciousness we are living in? First of all, it's a physical nature which has been mentalized. When we become conscious of these inner ranges, at first we experience them almost like a support at the back of. We don't live in them. To be suddenly thrown into them would be enormously disorienting. You will suddenly lose this very narrow, rigid focus that you have on this little personality. You would find yourself as if feeling aware everywhere, and it can be a little disorienting. It is something of this which is glimpsed when people are put under psychedelic drugs, and suddenly the consciousness boundaries are removed. But at the level at which you are, it does not change the quality of your consciousness. And to the degree that you're able to register in your current capacity. And so one gets overwhelmed, one burns out the nervous system, being too overwhelmed by this inrush of vital forces, generally things of a lower grade. And because of that burnout, you may even become blind, unable to access the true inner ranges, which are to be done by normally slower and more graded process through the yoga. So we experience this at the back as if a support, but then we are able to draw from that as necessary. But this is, he says, even in the in a high stage of development that we become aware of them. We do not actually live on those planes. So even when you're conscious of these things, are you living in the plane of the vital or the mental? No, you're still living in the physical plane. Your consciousness may become aware of those things, those planes, but you don't live in them. We do not actually live on those planes, for if we did, we could very soon arrive at the conscious control of the body by the life power, and of both by the sovereign mind. Conscious control of the body by the life power, and of both by the sovereign mind. This would be the result of living on those planes. So let's look at what it is. Right now, we experience the body having an experience of life force and mental awareness. If you lived in the mental plane, you would be this wide, freed mental awareness, and the body would be like a narrow projection that is like a container that you're holding. And then from there, you can will your consciousness into the body, grip it as if from inside out, and will it to change. When you are right now bound inside the body, you have something of that experience to the extent that you have been mentalized. To the extent that you have been mentalized, for example, you find your body is doing something you don't like, you can stop it by willing it. You find a surge of emotions, you take a deep breath, calm yourself, struggle to will the surge of emotions to become quiet. You use some physical processes sometimes, and then gradually you will it into quietness. But that's because the surge of emotion was still largely overwhelming to your consciousness, which is mostly physical. If your consciousness was living in the vital or the mental, the surge of emotion comes, but you are not the emotion. You are something else which can will and instantly change it. As easily as if your hand was, if as easily as you can will your hand to move, for example, to will it to lift an object. What do? You don't think of how shall I move my hand? Do I need to breathe deeply to move it? You just enter the hand consciousness and move it because it's yours. You grip the hand with your mind awareness. The same would happen with your emotions. The same would happen with all the physical processes, which would then be very quickly brought under the ambit of the mental influence. Even if that mental influence goes deep enough, it could take over what is still under control of the autonomic nervous system. That means it's the automatic part. Your heart is beating. Can you feel it? You can feel the pulsation as it pops up on a surface skin where you are conscious. But you're not conscious of the tissue inside. You cannot feel the heartbeat. But if you try this as an experiment, become very quiet and try to shift your awareness into the tissue inside, after a while you'll find you can as if sense the pulsation of your heart inside, not the way it reflects on the surface tissue. And if you can bring it to that point where you can feel the heart actually beating, you will find you can will it to relax and to slow down the beating. Awareness brings with it power of control. What you're not aware of, you're unable to control. But when you live in the mental body or the mental plane first, from there you can infuse your mind awareness into the body. You can very quickly bring these things into your awareness and with it a control. So if we do not actually live on those planes, for if we did, we could very soon arrive at the conscious control of the body by the life powers and of both by the sovereign mind. But the steps he describes here is first by the life power and then by the mind. I've most of the examples I've given are of the mind controlling because that's something we can relate to more easily. But the life power is closer to the physical, and the life energy controlling the physical has a very different character of experience. It is experienced more as the uh, energy of the will rather than awareness which drives. So your body is tired, you can as if lean back from the tired part of the body, access the life energy, and then infuse it into the body. And as if a fresh gust of wind fills and energizes, and the body is able to do what it wants. I've seen this happen sometimes with young people who are just beginning to experience what it's like to dominate the body with either life force, will, or mind. So, one example is of a relatively young person. He's just found out that his mind can will the body, he can step back from the body and keep doing exercise. Now, when you normally do an exercise, let's say you're pumping a weight, there's a point where the body becomes so tired it can't move anymore. That's the part where, that's the stage where if you're identified with the body, you say, I can't, and you let go. The pain is too great, and you let go because you are suffering, because you are body. But here the person separates out and looks at the pain and says, I am not the body, I am not the pain, and wills the hand to continue. Now the hand has become stiff, but he continues. It starts paining, it becomes hot, filled with pain. He continues because he has separated himself and wills it with the mind and the life force. And there's a point where the pain increases so much, the muscles are tearing. fibers are tearing, and he can continue. So these are examples of people, and we've seen this. It's not too difficult to do. It just needs this very strong mental will to separate out. And you keep doing until the body even seems as if to collapse, and still you can push it a little more. Of course, you suffer afterwards because the muscle tissue is torn and it takes a few weeks to heal. But this is possible. What is the difference between this person and the other one who says, I can't move anymore, my body is jammed? The difference is where you identified. If you identify with the body capacity, you are its creation. You shift into the vital energy. You can infuse the body with the vital force and with the will keep pushing it. And the body seems to be able to do so much more. If you identify with the mental consciousness and with the mental will you push, you can do even more. But the difference of the vital push and the mental push is important. The vital force filling the body can energize, can even push the body to do things which normally it could not, but with life force, not with a higher awareness. The mind infusing itself in the body does not directly relate to the body. It relates to the life force, which then drives the body. Because in terms of gradation, mind is closer to life force than the body. Life force then pushes body, and the result is you infuse mind, push the life force, and life force pushes body. But here is an awareness that fills life force. You can feel the quality of the life force. You can bring clarity and awareness into the action of life force. And if now you do this consciously, not just driving the body like a slave until it breaks down, but you do a single action consciously, you take this, maybe a light weight, half a kilo, or no weight at all, just the weight of your hand. Do this movement, consciously infusing your awareness into it. Feel the tissue. As you do this, you begin to become conscious of the fine fibers of the muscles. And you put more awareness into that, you can begin to feel and make that fiber conscious. And if you've brought it to the point where you can feel the tissue inside your muscles and the fibers of your muscles, you can will them to regenerate faster. You can will them to relax at will. Otherwise, what happens? The muscle cramps, and then you're stuck with a cramp. What do you do then? You take medicine which relaxes the cramp. The medicine acts at a biological level and does what your consciousness cannot reach. But if you have made the fiber conscious, you can feel the tension of the knot and consciously relax the way you would relax your arm. You relax the knot in the muscle. You don't need the medicine. So, when the body has been infused with the power of the mind, the consciousness of the mind, and the body has been sufficiently mentalized, the mind can literally lead it to do things which normally it would not be capable of. Or the same with the life force infused into it, the body can demonstrate great energy, vitality, strength, even a kind of a power of action which normally it would not be capable of. And you can see how both of these tend towards phenomena which would normally be abnormal or paranormal. We'll see how far that goes in the next two paragraphs when he speaks of what happens when you act from this freed consciousness. For if we did, we could very soon arrive at the conscious control of the body by the life power, and of both by the sovereign mind. When you do that, and especially if you are in the sovereignty of mind, emotions would not be a problem. The same way as you can consciously lift your hand, relax it, tighten it, and move it, you will be able to lift your life energies, relax them, tighten them, modify their states, change states of emotions. I find this tendency of anger rising up. I consciously relax, and the anger goes away. I relax the emotions, I relax the life force. I refine the life force by lifting it into a higher grade. I don't like this coarse vibration. I shift it up now. It becomes clear, soft, and it does not have this coarse reactivity anymore. What you would do with the physical body, substance, you do now with life energy substance, and to some degree even in the mental substance. We should then be able to determine our physical and mental life to a very large extent by our will and knowledge as masters of our being, and with a direct action of the mind on the life and body. If you've worked on this and you live in the mental plane first, and from the mental plane act on the vital and physical, this is what you have, the mastery. If you look at all the spiritual traditions, all the occult traditions, and all of the finer developed cultures of the world, this is the one thing they try to do, but with different degrees and different aims. The cultures, when refined, will teach you, let's say as a child, you should not put your elbows on the dining table. You should not chew with your mouth open. What are you trying to do? Telling the child to become conscious of something and changing a habitual pattern of the physical body. You should always say thank you. That's shifting from the physical body to the life energy, where I see a cake, I grab because I want. Wait, your turn will come. First, give to others. So I'm learning to restrain my impulsiveness, but with what? With the mental awareness. I learn to say thank you, again, a mental value which is being infused. And in this way, you're trying to lift what would be otherwise a more barbaric, instinctive, physical life to something of a higher gradation, mentalizing it. But with the cultures, it reaches a point which is primarily of mental values of a superficial type, not the deeper powers of the mind or the deeper powers of the vital. So, a cultured person may feel angry because you've insulted him, but he's able to restrain the expression of his anger. Inside, he's troubled, but the expression is held back. He's still able to give you a polite smile and a cold thank you, and he can walk away. Or with what is called sang-froid, cold blood, he's able to give you a nice blow, but with no appearance of agitation. Whereas somebody who is not trained will get upset, shout, and scream, but would not have the control. Here, the person has been sufficiently refined with the ability, this mastery of yourself, but at a very superficial level. And that is already great. It represents a more developed humanity. The next degree of this mastery is what you find in occult traditions, where the effort is made to further deepen the inner awareness, access the inner vital or the inner mental powers by a similar process. Restraint first of the instincts and then deepening the access to those regions. A large part of the development of occult traditions is centering on the willpower, with the recognition that this is the key. We should be able to determine our physical and mental life to a very large extent by our will and knowledge. What you know, you should be able to do. What you will, you should be able to exercise. But push this a little further. Now, with your knowledge and your will, can you draw a little more of the inner vital and the inner mental capacities? With your will and your knowledge, can you open out to perceive things of the vital senses or the mental senses? And that's really the whole realm of occult training. Central to it all is the exercise of the willpower, for which enormous importance is given to all kinds of exercises to strengthen the will. Sometimes, in the more violent forms of the training, they will tell you to take a willful decision, which is very difficult to maintain, and then continuously insist on doing it, even to the great discomfort of the physical body. Once you have decided, you will not fall back. And it's only when you build a strong enough will and with it the power of concentration that you are able now to cut through, penetrate this veil, and tap into some power or some knowledge of the inner regions. So, if, for example, the goal was as an occult exercise to infuse life energy into a part of your body or into some other object. The same process you would do if you could you could as if lean back into the inner vital and draw from their life force into your physical body. Now you want to extend it into the flower. You could do it through the physical body, which is holding the flower, or more directly with the concentration of the will, you as if turn to life force, build, intensify, and then push it, infusing, willing, visualizing, whatever the forms would be. The exact same thing that all of us would do if we wanted the flower to revivify itself. You would will it, you would want it, you would visualize it, but it doesn't happen because your willpower is weak, your power of concentration is weak. When these are amplified 100-fold, you will actually see the result. It will still take 5 minutes because there's a biological process for its full glow, but you could hold it in your hand and concentrate with that intention, have a chat for 5 minutes, and then the flower is in full bloom once again. And we have seen people do things like that. Key is willpower and the power of concentration. The occult stops with that. The spiritual takes the same thing to a different level. It seeks not only to become conscious of your own consciousness on higher levels, but to open this consciousness to still higher levels. That's what makes it spiritual. But at the core of all these is that first training which tries to mentalize the physical instincts and the vital instincts and even the mental habits to lift them to something higher. And with that, the ability of, to a very large extent, determine our physical and mental life by our will and knowledge as masters. So the mastery of a cultured man is superficial. The mastery of an occult man has a deeper dimension. But the spiritual mastery is when of the soul or self or a higher consciousness than these three. The aspect of the spiritual mastery will come in the next chapter, which is titled The Ladder of Self Transcendence. But for now, we realize even if there is a mental mastery of these lower parts, the mind is the link which can consciously open to the higher spiritual. And so, in any case, this is the common ground for all these different objectives. If the mind cannot first take charge, it cannot make the link to the spirit. Vital on its own is unable to feel or call the spirit nor the physical. They're too dull, they're too bound in their narrowness. So he's referring to here masters of our being and with a direct action of the mind on the life and body. What is this direct action as distinct from indirect action? Indirect action is what you've been taught in your first step of culturing and self control. Every time you get angry, put your hands in your pocket. So I get angry, I remember, oh, I have to put my hands in my pocket. I put it and I hold. And of course, the impulse of anger, it's an impulse, it passes in a few seconds. Now I can take out my hands and I'm still angry, but you're upset, take a deep breath and relax. Breathe deeply 3 times. Sit down. Don't stand. Don't walk around when you're upset. Relax. These are all indirect methods by which you're trying to change the state of your body, your emotions, or your thoughts. Your mind is clouded. You're confused. Go out for a walk. Get into the cold air. Look at the mountain. Appreciate nature. You distract the mind and something changes. So those are indirect methods. The direct method is, oh, I'm upset. And the way I relax my hand, I relax my emotions. I relax my thoughts. I turn them, I widen them, I focus them as I would the physical hands. So it's a direct action. The direct action means the consciousness of mind has a direct ability to act on these two, not needing other indirect methods, because these have been sufficiently mentalized and are, as it is felt, in its grip. By yoga, this power of transcending the physical self and taking possession of the higher selves may to a greater or less degree be acquired through a heightened and widened self consciousness and self mastery. So it's a very simple statement, but do you see the implications of this? The power of transcending the physical self and taking possession of the higher selves may be acquired. Just as you, in the physical self, you are body, taking possession of the vital self would mean I am life force. Taking possession of the mental self would be I am mind, as the Purusha status, the consciousness shifting. And then from the status of Purusha, it would extend to the activities of mind, the state of mental energy, and change the state of mental energy, and that would be the acquiring possession of the prakriti of mind or vital, as the case may be. So, this power of transcending the physical self and taking possession of higher selves may be acquired to a greater or less degree. How much can you do it depends on the kind of effort you put and your current ability. But the key will be in the heightening and widening of consciousness and this process of self mastery. So, through a heightened and widened self consciousness and self mastery, the key of the nature and mastery of nature is the consciousness which you are of that grade. If that consciousness becomes wide, free, supple, it can act freely in the nature of that grade. So that's why this the two sides, the Purusha and Prakriti side, and with it the relationship of Purusha and Prakriti, with which you're able to modulate at will. Now, how do you do this? The first step will be to get the consciousness to be free, the consciousness to rise. Once the consciousness enters the vital or the mental self, at that point it is able to exercise its influence on the vital and mental substance, shape it, modify its habits, and then build its degrees of mastery, greater or lesser degree. But the first key is shifting of consciousness. You can't shift the power in Prakriti from a lower grade to influence a higher grade of Prakriti. You have to lift the consciousness, and from there you can influence the current grade of consciousness or lower gradations. So, this will be the key. So, the next paragraph takes this up. This may be done on the side of Purusha by drawing back from the physical self and its preoccupation with physical nature, and through concentration of thought and will, raising oneself into the vital and then into the mental self. Here is the process in essence. By doing so, we can become the vital being and draw up the physical self into that new consciousness, so that we are only aware of the body, its nature, and its actions as secondary circumstances of the life soul, which we now are, used by it for its relations with the material world. So, just first as an experience, it's as if you have drawn yourself up. You are now centered into vital soul. The physical soul, physical body, and its machinery is as if your extension, plugging into the physical world. Similar movement, drawing into the mental, would then feel the vital and the physical as plugging in into these gradations for action on those levels. But at the heart of the movement of this separation, drawing back from the physical self and its preoccupation with physical nature, first step. And through concentration of thought and will, raising oneself into the vital and then into the mental self, second step. You will see in classical yoga, which is the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, this movement of drawing back is what is described as pratyahara. It's described traditionally as the movement of a tortoise So, a tortoise has this shell, it's got its hands and legs sticking out and its head sticking out. The moment it senses danger, it pulls its arms and legs in, pulls its head in, and it's inside. Now, the experience is no different. When it's pulled its arms, legs, and head in, the shell is there outside, but it is not fixed, plugged into the shell. It feels itself separate. It's almost as if the shell could be discarded and it would still be there. And then it re engages, re enters, and now joins with the shell. And now it is a part of the shell, its arms and legs and head extended from the shell, as if. You put your hands inside gloves, you pull your hands out of gloves. You put yourself inside a dress, into the arms of the dress, you pull yourself out. It's exactly the same movement. Only now it is in relation to the physical body and the physical consciousness. Now, what is it that binds us in the physical body and physical consciousness? The sense of the physical self. I am body, I feel identified with it, and preoccupation with physical nature. Oh, I'm feeling warm, I'm feeling cold, I'm feeling restless, I'm feeling itchy. I am conscious of these things. This is my world, this is my life, these are my possessions. All the obsessive fixation on things around us at the physical level, but of our body as a physical experience, and then of the sense of I, which is identified with body. So now your consciousness is plugged in like this, let's say, first drawn to physical world and things, possessions, ownership. This is mine, that is not mine. Who are you? You're a threat, you're a friend, you're enemy. All that now you withdraw from. None of this is me. None of this is mine. And then you're in the body. Your body is feeling light, heavy, itchy, comfortable. And you pull back from this. And as if center yourself in pure awareness in body, of body, but none of the phenomena of body are of relevance to you. You're only aware in body and of body, but you're not nature of body. At this point, you are centered in the what he has described as the physical soul or being. And then, through concentration of thought and will, raising oneself into the vital and then into the mental self. So you have to concentrate. Concentration of thought and will. Where is your awareness? You can still be turned to physical awareness. You withdraw that and turn your awareness to your mind or life force. Let's start with mind because that is easier to sense. You're aware of the mind, you as thinking person, and here you are, you as body person, and you put your awareness this on this thinking awareness and concentration of thought and then will. Thinking awareness, and then put your full will, and as if with the will drawn towards that, you as the center begins to shift and rise and come to identify with this thinking mind awareness. This shift, this rising movement, at first you will experience something. You continue to do this. The moment you let go of the focus, you tend to slide back to somewhere in between. You do this regularly, and there comes a point where you are beginning to stay in mind awareness, less and less in physical awareness. A part of you as if extends down, and you pull that also. So initially, you do it in an exaggerated way. You hold that poise for a while, and then you stay in this mind awareness, and you notice, oh, you have a body, but there's nothing of the body which feels like you. I'm not the body, I have a body. I am this mind awareness. You exercise this again and again. Increasingly, you shift the poise of your awareness in your day to day interactions. When I meet somebody, my body instinct, my life force instinct reaches out in a habitual way. I shift my awareness to the mind. And now I see the whole relationship very differently, much less attached, much freer, much clearer. Things happen which would normally have upset me, and I say, that happened again. Oh, okay. What do I want to do about it? I'm thinking first, not reacting. If there's a reaction, it is in the mind, not in the emotions, not in the body. Something similar happens, a kind of dissociation happens when the body is in extreme struggle or pain. I've shared an experience which I had when I was 12 years old, and I had read perhaps one of these books. One of the events I had read, an incident I had read, which influenced me deeply. There's a book called Dune by Frank Herbert. It's a whole fantasy science fiction where this young boy is now being tested whether he's worthy of being royalty. So the lady who comes to test him, she puts his hand in a box and switches on something. And it's a pain box. It triggers the nerves to create the sensation of pain. And then she puts a little poison needle to his neck, saying, if you cannot bear this, you don't deserve to live. So now he has a choice, either bear the pain or die. And then she increases the pain until he experiences as if his hand is melting with fire, but he holds on with pure willpower. And eventually, when she's satisfied, she switches off the box, the pain goes away, the hand comes out, it's intact. Of course, the whole thing was just triggering of the nerves. And you see in this experience the identification of the person. If I am body, my body is in pain, my body is burning, my body is. I would have pulled it out. If I am mind, and that was the point of that whole test, are you worthy of this authority which will be given to you as royalty? If I am mind, I can say, I am not body. This is only nerve signals. And you can dissociate from the pain. So it was something I had read, and somewhere in my mind that idea had remained. I don't know if, but it was there. And so I was soldering. I found my finger burnt with the solder. Scald mark forms. I call out, "Mom, help!" Put my finger into ice. It becomes numb, but then afterwards the numbness hurts. So you pull out the finger. Now the burning sensation comes back. So then I said, okay, the worst is over. It's already burnt. Nothing more is going to happen. What if I don't do anything? Because I know that nothing more can burn, no tissue damage will take place. These are only nerve signals. And so I look at my finger and I say, okay, let's see how far this goes. And so I watch, and the pain starts growing. And as it grows, instinctively, it calls your consciousness to identify with the pain. I am in pain. And you pull your consciousness back. And as it throbs and grows, it pulls you back and you pull back. It's a very interesting experience. The body is pulling you to identify, but the mind has a choice to separate. And there's a subtle tug of war of consciousness. And then I held the poise, and the pain grew. And it seemed as if, or it felt as if the whole body was pulsating in pain, or it would explode. That's the feeling in the body. But the mind says, it's only ripples of electricity in my nervous system. There is no tissue being damaged. There's nothing to worry about. And you're living in these two different realities at the same time. And so it grows until it grew so intense that it felt, wow, this is really, really intense. And then suddenly, whoop, it stops. No more pain. And for the rest of whatever time it took to heal, I had no pain at all. And I never understood why. But that experience of separating gave to the mind a tremendous conviction that yes, it's possible. You can see how an experience like this would help to separate from the body. And so, in many of the occult traditions, they put you through physical discomfort, even torture of certain kinds, to help the mind to break free from that identification. I recall reading in one of the books which I had seen long ago. In their practice, they would say that to develop the power of the will, you decide to do something, you do it, and if for any reason your body and your will flags, then you cause torture to the body, cause it some injury or some pain. And the idea is to teach the body that you are not allowed to disobey the mind's will, but it is also to teach the mind to dissociate from the body and say, I'm not body, the pain is in the body, not in my mind. These are brutal and very crude methods, but one understands the principle behind them. And the principle is simply this: you have a choice to identify with mind or with body. And the movement of separation is precisely this first withdrawal into the center, which is the Purusha consciousness. And then the Purusha now turns to its own higher mental awareness and literally lifts itself to now identify and live poised in the mind awareness. Very interesting experience to do consciously. Now, all of us have this to some degree, but the degree is something intermediate, something floating, closer to the physical. And maybe the part of the physical which turns to mind, and that's about all. But to pull it fully into mind is an important experience. But the method he has described is very simple: drawing back from the physical self and its preoccupation with physical nature, and through concentration of thought and will, raising oneself into the vital and then into the mental self. Now, in principle, why stop with the mind? Why not keep going to still higher ranges until you reach to the highest poise of the self? In principle, that would be the method, except you're aware of your mind so you can rise, shift to it. You're not aware of the higher ranges. You're not aware of the intuitive or the self. What's that? I don't know where to go. I don't know what state it feels like, so I cannot rise to it. And that's why this chapter is lower triple Purusha. The next chapter will deal with how do you ascend to higher states to which you do not have direct access, of which you don't have a real experience yet. So this is a different process and that is a different process. By doing so, we can become the vital being and draw up the physical self into that new consciousness, so that we are only aware of the body, its nature, and its actions as secondary circumstances of the life soul which we now are. So, who am I? Where earlier I was this body, now I am the life energy which is inhabiting this body, or which has a body through which it can act in the physical world. He has used three phrases here to describe this secondary circumstance of the life soul. So, we are only aware of the relationship with the body. He has used three phases. We are only aware of the body, its nature, and its actions as secondary circumstances. So, you're aware that there is a body, your life soul, which has a body. Then you're aware separately that it has a certain grade of consciousness, which in relation to the life soul is felt as dulling. Every time I slide from life soul back into the body, there's a dulling experience. For most of us, it is easier to be in the mind soul, and then you find that your body is dragging your mind. You want to do so much, but the body is as if being dragged by your mind, by your willpower, and it drags your mind and your will back. And that relationship, you feel the quality of the body consciousness, it's dull, it's heavy, it has inertia, it tends to slide into passivity left to itself. And it's as if the mind has to will it, grip it, and drag it along to make it do things. So we are aware of the body, its nature, and its actions. Whatever is being done, I lift the glass and drink water. I'm doing some work. I'm playing music. I'm writing. You notice the hand is writing quite exactly whatever you want, which you think of. You're thinking of a word and the hand has written it. What happened in between? It is doing this. It is typing and it's doing things on the keyboard which you're not conscious of. You look at your fingers and you say, oh, it's typing quite well. If you have ever trained to play with a musical instrument, this initial phase is where you are consciously playing the music. And if at any moment you lose your attention, someone comes in, you look away, you have lost the thread, your fingers make a mistake. But very quickly, the fingers get trained, and as they move, you're able to look away, you're able to chat, you're able to do all kinds of things, and the hands keep on going on. At that point, that center of consciousness, which is guiding the music or the activity, has separated from the body and its processes and taken a poise either in the vital or in the mental to whatever degree, at least for that activity. And this is used for its relations with the material world. Otherwise, you live much more in the vital or the mental, using the body for experience of things with matter. A certain remoteness from physical being, and then a superiority to it. A vivid sense of the body being a mere instrument or shell and easily detachable. An extraordinary effectivity of our desires on our physical being and life environment. All of these things are our experience then. A great sense of power and ease in manipulating and directing the vital energy, of which we now become vividly conscious, for its action is felt by us concretely, subtly physical in relations to the body, sensible in a sort of subtle density as an energy used by the mind. And then, fifth, an awareness of the life plane in us above the physical, and knowledge and contact with beings of the desire world. Sixth, a coming into action of new powers, what are usually called occult powers or siddhis. Seventh, a close sense of and sympathy with the life soul in the world, and a knowledge or sensations of the emotions, desires, vital impulses of others. These are some of the signs of this new consciousness gained by yoga. Now, this is, remember, only shifting to the life soul and now basing yourself there. And he has described 7 broad categories of change, and these are sequenced. The first is what you get most easily. When that becomes more stable, it opens access to the second category of experience, and then the third, and the fourth, and so on. As you become established in it, the powers associated with the consciousness of that grade, the nature of that domain, are bit by bit opening out to you. So there is first the consciousness shifting, and then the nature corresponding to that range, which is beginning to open out. So we'll look at each of these 7 with a few examples where necessary. The first thing which you have from this is a certain remoteness from physical being, and then a superiority to it. And we could, recognizing these symptoms, we could dwell on these symptoms and amplify them to assist the stabilizing of consciousness in this new poise. So now we have shifted to the level of the vital soul. What is body? Oh, it's not me. It often happens to people. They look into the mirror and they say, who is this person? And that's because there's a kind of a dissociation from this physical appearance. Most easy because you rarely see your face. All you have is the mirror as your image. But if you saw your hand, you wouldn't have it so easily. But still, the idea is similar. You disengage, and oh, there is a body, but I'm not the body. And there's a kind of a distance. In quality of consciousness, you have the distance. You're located right here, but in quality, this is a different grade altogether. And then a superiority to it. I'm more free. I'm more able to exercise my freedom, and this yields, this follows. I'm above. This has to be stabilized first. This leads to the second class of phenomena, a vivid sense of the body being a mere instrument or shell and easily detachable. So it feels as if, oh, this body, I can just separate myself from it. And I have to act through it. Whatever I do, I'm training the body to do things. So the mere instrument or shell is the kosha, the sense of that layer now separated. You are now in a different layer and easily detachable. That's when the separation has become more complete. Remember, this initial shift is only in a tiny part, in the core. That has to extend now to the rest. And so, with this comes the freedom in the whole body form shell now. When that happens, you will find automatically the sense of detachment gives you access to other things. But that will come later. So, third category of phenomena, an extraordinary effectiveness of our desires on our physical being and life environment. Whatever I choose to do now, I can exercise on the body. Not only on the body, but in the environment circumstances. So you say, I really want this thing to happen. And you will find things tend to happen because the action of your really wanting is taking place in the life plane and therefore directly influencing things in the life plane, which then influence the physical plane. So there are two dimensions to it. One is in your own body, your life is able to exercise some capacity. And then in the environment, similarly, it begins to happen and of its own. It's an interesting correspondence, which is what he has hinted at in the earlier paragraph we saw last time, where he spoke of. I'll read that sentence. There is, says the Upanishad, a fivefold soul in man and the world, the microcosm and the macrocosm. Remember, we discussed that a little bit, that we realize everything out there has its condensation and representation here, and whatever we have here as powers has its corresponding universal action as distinct from its individual action. But this is what you will see now in the subsequent descriptions of the rising into the vital soul and the mental soul. With this, now you're able to have what you experience within yourself in relation to your body, you have as experience in relation to things in the physical world outside you. Now, none of this is really new for us. We have always had intuitions of these things. As children, we know that if I really want something, it can happen. It doesn't always happen, but we know that it can happen. And we do make that effort to try it. And again, spontaneously, it happens to us. We say, if I can somehow climb all these steps in 10 seconds, then it will happen. Have you had something like that? Something if I jump, hop, skip, and jump and complete this, then that thing will happen. As if you're telling yourself and convincing yourself and putting your will into making this. This is really at the root of many of the magical uh, techniques. An exercise of the will with a physical focus of achievement in form, but in spirit, it is a focus of the will on the desire, on the intention, and accomplishment of something difficult. And so, because it's difficult, to gather your will more intensely and direct it to that fulfillment of your desire. So, I jumped really high. I made this effort for so much. For many, it takes the form of denial. I had a friend, his one of his relatives was ill, and he said, I will give up eating something which he loves very much. And with that willpower, as long as I'm able to give up eating this, my relative will be well or will get well if I can give it up completely. Instinctively, the idea was that struggle with a physical circumstance or desire is your means of concentrating and intensifying your will for an action. And you see here what we sense instinctively, but the truth behind it is this. Because we are now operating much more at the level of life plane, the action in our own body is now different, but it ripples out also because in the life plane you're not bound by the body form. As long as you were identified with the physical body, you ended here, and the rest was the other. But in the life plane, where do you end? Because already you have detached from the physical form. Is there a boundary? and you feel connected to all the workings of life energy around you. So, an extraordinary effectivity of our desires on our physical being and life environment. At least you're able to influence the life energies, thoughts, feelings, impulses in others. But first, on your own body, extraordinary effectivity of our desire. I want to do this, and I'm able to will my body to be able to do it. I'm able also to modulate how my desires operate, act, and express in the body, even the ability to change the form of my desire. A great sense of power and ease in manipulating and directing the vital energy, of which we now become vividly conscious. Because you are now much more identified here, and these earlier steps must have taken place. You must have gone sufficiently separated from the physical body that now you begin to experience things of the vital proper. And that's when you can feel this vital energy as a thing in itself. As long as you're physically identified, you feel an energy, oh, I feel light, I feel fresh. But the energy was almost as if a secondary phenomenon of your body. Oh, now my body feels light, I feel more energetic. But I didn't distinguish the quality of energy which made it light. But now, when I'm in my life force proper, life soul proper, I feel life energy first, and I can feel how it lifts my body and makes it feel light. But first was the life energy, which is now distinct, and you grow vividly conscious. For its action is felt by us concretely, subtly physical in relation to the body. So it is as if of the same density of the body, but subtly physical in its quality. The feel of it is like a dense substance, filling, flowing. Sensible in a sort of subtle density as an energy used by the mind. So you're aware of this energy, and with your mind, you're able to direct it. I put more of it in my fingers. I direct it to a part where I have an illness or some discomfort, and after a while, the pain goes away. But you're directing the energy with your mind. The energy itself is a thing that you can almost as if manipulate and direct. That brings you to the next category of phenomena, an awareness of the life plane in us above the physical. And the second aspect to this, and knowledge and contact with beings of the desire world. So at this point, you have become so conscious of the life force as a thing in itself that you're able to feel this as pervading everywhere. And this is now the life plane that you're beginning to live in proper. Remember what he said earlier, we don't live in it properly. This first step of separation would not get you there yet. You have to go through all these finer gradations of the Prakriti aspect, plugging in, connecting it to the operation of life energy. And here you're coming into the awareness of life plane proper in us. And then, as extending into the universe, knowledge and contact with beings of the desire world. And it can happen at first in a very subtle way. You enter a space and you feel, oh, there is something here. And you can feel what that something wants or what is the mood of that imprint in the life plane. But as always, the moment you're aware, you can also modify. You can also feel in yourself a different quality of clarity of life force and extend it to clear out this disturbance in the life plane. Or the same would be in the mind plane. Here's a clutter of thought forms. People who have lived here have left behind a lot of chaos in mind. And you bring a clarity of mind awareness and as if push out the thoughts, clean it out. It's literally the sense like a broom. Physically, you sweep out with your life force, you expand your quality of consciousness and push it out. With your mind awareness, you bring the calm and clarity of mind of a higher grade of mental awareness and push it out. And interestingly, like a physical substance, you have a sense of pushback sometimes. I pushed out, and the moment I stopped, it began to creep in. It's almost like elastic substance. You push it out, it comes back. And that's where you realize the will you infuse makes a difference. You push it out, and now will it. And so, as if in the substance you have put an intention, infused an awareness and an intention which holds, and then you turn your attention away, it continues to stay. All of this becomes very normal because you're aware of this as vividly as in the physical identification, you were aware of physical substance. And so, knowledge and contact with the beings of the desire world, one senses these things, one is aware of what they're trying to do, what their want is, or in a more general way, a ripple of a quality of consciousness. You can feel, there's a kind of an energetic chaos. Why is that? And then you look for the cause and you might find it somewhere. Oh yes, it's coming from there, or it's because of a certain change in the season. At the transition points often you have some disturbance. Oh, it's full moon. Always there is certain agitation in the astral domain when there is a full moon. Okay, that's what it is. But you're aware first, and then you can find its sources. And then the next phase from this, a coming into action of new powers, what are usually called occult powers or siddhis. So, already at this point, since you're aware, you're able to exercise your will, these things may begin to happen. I remember a friend of mine who was in business shared with me some of his experiences, and I believe this is the case with a lot of successful businessmen. That you will see a successful businessman who makes a lot of money or gets his business going, gets the orders, has a very strong vitality or the ability to wield his vitality. If you do not have that, you cannot be successful. Because primarily the domain of business is exchange, an exchange of energies, which includes the energy of wealth and resources. So people who enter business with a very mental consciousness cannot be successful unless they have somebody who is able to wield the vital, who is the real cause of their success. And inevitably, you have to have someone who interfaces for that action. So in his experience, he would narrate how he would go to a board meeting, large number of people, each coming with their own objectives, with their own agendas, with their own preconceived ideas or interests. And he would feel, and he'll say, here is a soft spot. This one is malleable. Interesting. So he'll feel, here's a person who can be influenced. And then he would focus on that person to get his viewpoint across, get the person on his side. Or before people came in, he would put a strong intention that when they come in, they would be swayed by the intention or the thought form he has created. I remember once even he was describing how he would blindfold himself and then try to feel things around him and walk into a unknown space and feel space around him. Obviously, the whole thing is happening first at a subtle level, but through that subtle, a sense of the physical world. Many interesting experiments like this. One of the things he would do is put out a strong impulse for someone to turn to be friendly to him. And then once the deal was done, he has forgotten. And then he said, a month or two later, suddenly that energy he had put out as a thought formation or desire formation comes back to him, nudging him. Look at me, look at me. He says, what is this? It's finished 2 months ago. He discovered on his own that what he was doing was projecting a certain formation, which would then come back to him once it had exhausted its energy and leech on him. Of course, he didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know that one could dissolve these equally, and so on. But all of this I'm explaining I'm giving as an example to show that naturally, once you're conscious of a substance and its independent reality and can wield it, it falls into the category of occult powers. You're influencing events, influencing things, or perceiving things and perceiving events. And if you have this perception of the beings of the desire world, you can see what they intend to do, what they're trying to do. You could put an equally a counter will or effort to block them out. You'll remember the mother speaking of an incident when she was sitting on the terrace and she saw Kali dancing and coming to her saying, Paris will be taken. And it was during the First World War when there was the danger that the Germans were about to take over Paris. And on that side, the people in Paris had said, there's no way we can fight a superior power. Rather than us dying and them destroying our city, we will yield. It had been decided, the orders given that nobody was to fight. And here Kali comes dancing, and mother says, no. And she put a strong will countering that whole thing. And then she narrates what happened next was the Germans came to Paris, they saw the whole place unprotected. They thought there's a trap, and they turned back and left. And then the French chased them and defended the city. Here was an action by a force. And it's very difficult for us to recognize because we tend to think of the force as this form that you saw. It's not this form that is hopping around. This form is the, let's say, face of a body which is the force. And it is the body which is spread out in its action on a collective scale and sometimes on a universal scale. But this was of a lower grade of one of the emanations on the vital plane. And here it was expressing its exaltation at an imminent defeat or shift of balance of power. And when Mother put her force, it was a force not just a mere vital will, but of a consciousness which was a much larger spiritual consciousness. So it overwhelms the vital force and modifies, neutralizes. And it has its ripple effect down through the life force in each individual. Now, the energy put out in the will is not specifying what each one should change. It's just the no, which has neutralized the trend of that vital force of the Kali energy, which was going to tilt the balance. Here, the no reverses that tilt and it ripples out in each individual according to the mold of their life energy, desire, mind, body. And so each one begins to behave in the way that it is slanted. Where earlier they said, oh, we are going to lose, it's finished, and they are hopeless, suddenly the energy comes up and says, no, but. And on the other side, where they said, we are going to conquer, suddenly there's a hesitation and pullback. What if? And the mind is filling in now the shift in life force, which is fear, doubt, and pulls back. On the other side, where there was fear and doubt, there is now the new energy that says, oh, but we can. And the whole thing is tilted. So, in the event as it is described, it seems like two people meeting, but actually the action is happening in a consciousness which is spread out. And this is the distinction we have to recognize. We have dwelt extensively on this in the previous chapter when we were discussing the vital plane and the physical plane. The physical plane is characterized by form. And therefore, two forms cannot coexist. Form is bound with a boundary. And therefore, the world is defined by separations of forms and therefore fixed spaces. 10 centimeters is 10 centimeters here or there. But the moment you shift to the vital plane, it's not a world of form, it is a world of energies. Energy is not bound in limits. Energy is not colliding with another, it's passing right through. Like a gas. You can use the analogy of a gas. And it spreads, it is everywhere. The sense of space is in terms of affinity of energy, not in terms of boundary of form. So, two energies which are right here are different from each other in quality, they feel far. The same two energies are very close in similarity of quality, they feel close. And now, if you conceive of energy as spread out everywhere, your quality of energy resonates with those who have similar quality of energy. You feel close to each other. So someone can be right next to you, and if his energetic quality is very different, you feel a distance. You're in the same room, but I feel as if you're far away. You will say that to the person. On the other hand, someone on the other side of the world is talking to you on the phone, and you feel closeness of energy as if they're right here before you. So the sense of space in the vital plane has nothing to do with form and boundaries. It is qualitative energy. And so when you shift things in the energy, you may be here physically, but its impact is everywhere. And if the intention is directing to a group of people, then it is in that group of people that the change takes place. So when mother says, no, Paris will not be taken, it is a force put out operating in that entire region at the energy level, but arising from a higher mastery. But the same could have been done by someone colliding force with force on the vital plane. You would not have certitude of victory. But since it is an action emerging from a higher consciousness, it can easily defeat the vital formation or tendency. We have, and this is the basis of many occult battles, where force of vital energy of will is fighting force of vital energy of will, and this fellow pushes, that fellow pushes back. But at that point, all you have done is what you would do with physical arms and slingshots and stones or eventually missiles, you have replaced now with vital energies and forces. The consciousness which is in quarrel, in division, in strife is exactly the same. It is only a consciousness which is above division, which is the spiritual consciousness, which knows oneness of all things, that can act to harmonize and overcome these. There you have no strife. There you have only will and action, but it takes any, even the most contrary force, and sees it as an aspect of itself and wields and uses to bring true harmony. In the vital plane, true harmony is a question of balance. You give me some, I give you some, and as long as we are matching in what we give, that's our harmony. But at any point, it can be lost. But in the self, it is always in oneness. You give me more, I give you nothing, changes nothing. We still experience harmony. So the true harmony is always in the business of oneness, in mind, in vital, left to their own capacities, you will never experience harmony. But if mind is lifted up by the self to experience the underlying oneness, if the vital is infused with that sense of an underlying oneness, then they can begin to now express the truth of the spirit and shape themselves to be an instrument of the self. Even as in this description, the physical body becomes now an instrument of the vital and shapes itself to fulfill or to express its greater power and freedom. So the occult powers, siddhis, etc., now become natural. I have mostly what I've described had to do with things outside, but the same happens inside. Because your body is an instrument, is a shell, expressive of the life force which is you. And therefore, you're able to intensely amplify the quantity of life force in your body. You're able to withdraw the life force in a part of your body. You're able to modify its processes. And the result is you can demonstrate unusual things. Swami Rama, this is, in fact, this poise of the vital soul is very easy for the advanced Hatha yogis. That's what they get to generally when they demonstrate siddhis. So Swami Rama had this experiment he was doing in a lab to show them that he could consciously slow down the heartbeat, even stop it for a certain duration, and then resume it. And as he was doing this, suddenly he said, okay, I will show something else. And he chose to heat up his palm, which was also registered, one hand only. And then at that moment, when he was doing it, he felt the consciousness in the palm. He had a grip on it and he knew he could do it. And he said, wait, I'm going to do one more thing. He had never done it before. But he felt it when he gripped the body tissue with the vital energy. He said, now one part of the palm I will heat up, another palm I will cool down. And he was able to do that. But at that moment, because he was concentrated, it's as if you've put your hands inside the gloves. You can feel what you can do with it. You could do. Once you've pulled out, oh wow, that was difficult. I could do it then. Can I do it now? I'm not sure. But that ability to shape the biological working by willing the life force in it becomes almost spontaneous. How far can it be taken? Very far if you develop that skill. Generally, what will happen is you infuse life force in the whole hand. Can you fine tune the focus to a particular muscle, to a particular cell or a cluster of cells, to a particular process within the tissue or the cells? It will take time, it will take effort. It will need the mind to guide the life force to feel and enter and modify inside. But it's potentially possible. Slow, difficult, laborious process, but possible because your first life force and body is your instrument. But if you brought in something still higher, a higher spiritual force filling it could bring with it a super conscious awareness, filling the life energy. And then you would feel spontaneously, I can feel down to the fine tendrils and cells, and you could will it spontaneously. Because the consciousness coming is of a higher grade than the vital, which is not too conscious by itself. That's why mind has to infuse into the vital to be able to do things with it. But when super conscious spiritual awareness fills, it brings light into mind, into life force, even into the body. And suddenly everything is lifted up, becomes clear, aware, and super consciously aware, and is able to do things effortlessly without even making a strenuous attempt. And so, even it can happen that the suppleness of the physical body, the elasticity, plasticity of it can change just like that to express a certain state of consciousness that the person is in, maybe in an exalted, unusual state, but still. And so, you will see demonstrations of certain unusual appearances. And then it passes when that afflatus withdraws. But the principle is exactly the same. Even if it is a higher spiritual force filling, it still has to act through the vital on the physical, because the physical cannot respond to the spiritual directly. It responds to the vital, which responds to the mind, which responds to the spiritual. And necessarily it passes through those layers. And so finally, after this, he says, the last aspect of the phenomena, a close sense of and sympathy with the life soul in the world, and a knowledge or sensations of the emotions, desires, vital impulses of others. And this is where that consciousness which you had of the vital domain has become more and more completely universalized. At that point, you experience that essential life soul in world, not just in yourself. Where earlier I am this is world. The whole world is life energy. And as a result, because you're in a universal awareness of the life force, things happening in people are spontaneously reflected in your consciousness. So, knowledge or sensations of emotions, desires, vital impulses of others. Why does it say knowledge or sensations? In the experience, there are two facets to the experience. You see, experiencing sensation of the emotions or desires of others will mean you feel it as if they are yours. But when you say knowledge of emotions and desires of others, means they're not yours, but you're aware of them. So these correspond to two different ways in which one feels in that more universalized consciousness. So in the first case, which is knowledge, your awareness is there as if like a calm backdrop, like a mirror in the yoga tradition. And what's happening out there reflects in the mirror. So when the image of the forest reflects in the mirror, does the mirror actually become forest? Does the mirror actually get wet because it reflects the ocean or the lake? No, mirror is still mirror. So your consciousness becoming quiet, calm in the Purusha poise reflects what happens in that whole domain of universal life force. And so you have knowledge, that's what's happening there, that's what's happening, because it reflects in your perception. But you're not tainted, you're not mixed, you're not stuck with that vibration. And this is the most, let's say, safe way. The other way is when there is a sympathy. So the experience there is I feel what they are feeling. Sensations of emotions, desires, and vital impulses of others. I can feel it as if it's happening within me because my consciousness now includes them. And in this condition, all the mess of their confusion is also in you. And if at that point you are not poised sufficiently in the freedom of the Purusha status, you can easily get swayed. Because in the moment where you notice, oh, the poor person is suffering, your consciousness draws, it narrows back into ego center, except it's not in your body, it's in the other person's body. And you start experiencing what they're experiencing as if it's your experience. But if your poise of equality and base in the Purusha is strong enough, you may still experience that, but you won't lose the poise and reference of freedom. But initially, often one has this problem, and a lot of people who are open on the vital, in the vital soul or the vital plane, tend to have this problem. They are so empathic that they meet someone, instantly they experience what happens in the other, and they cannot distinguish between the other person's emotions and their own emotions. They get swayed. The person leaves, still the disturbance remains. After a certain time, when the imprint has faded, you realize, oh, I was not disturbed. I picked it up from someone else. That was the disturbance that I caught, like an infection. So that's the second type where you identify and know in identification. But the first is much safer, knowledge of emotions and desires of others, or you have sensations of emotions and desires and impulses of others. So the empathy with the life soul in the world is how one begins now to experience things. At that point, you are experiencing the universal life. And if you choose to live in its fullness, you experience simultaneously all the joys, all the sorrows, all the pain and suffering, as well as the enjoyments in the whole universe, as if it's happening in your larger self. In the yoga tradition, there is this story, profoundly symbolic, of Shiva during the churning of the ocean of consciousness, which throws up one after another many forms in evolution. Before the nectar of immortality emerges, there is the poison which emerges. And the poison is so overwhelming, it fills the whole world, and everybody is suffering. And at that point, Shiva, out of compassion, leans down and takes the whole poison and takes it into himself. And the symbol is like this: if he takes it into himself, he will be poisoned. But if he doesn't take it into himself, the world will be poisoned. So, what does he do? He takes it into himself and holds it in his throat and doesn't absorb it that he is extinguished. He holds it in his throat, contained. And so his throat becomes blue. And that's why one of the names of Shiva is the blue throated. But it's that aspect of the divine which leans to embrace the sorrow and suffering in the world and takes the burden of it onto himself. And if it was not the case, we would not have survived. Because in the initial emergence of evolution, our suffering is far greater than our happiness or freedom. And it is at that point that we most need that support, and the divine takes the burden of that suffering and assists us in that emergence to be free of that suffering. And so many who have passed through this experience of the identification with the universal life force share in that, in the passage through the experience. So, a close sense of the sympathy with the life soul in the world and a knowledge or sensation of the emotions, desires, vital impulses of others. These are some of the signs of this new consciousness gained by yoga. They're signs that you have gained this poise of the life soul. When we make this first exercise of drawing in, centering, and then shifting up, we will generally stop with the first two or three steps. A vivid sense, a certain remoteness with the physical being, a vivid sense of the body being a mere instrument or shell and easily detachable. And so at that point, you feel, oh, even if my body was knocked out, I will plug into another body. I'll take birth again, not a big deal, because you're not identified with the body. And then extraordinary effectivity of our desires on our physical being. That's about where most people get to before they then move on into the mental consciousness. And because that's a more habitual status for the thinking Homo sapiens, thinking humanity, because we're first mind and only separate after life force and body. So then he takes up in the next step, in the next paragraph, what happens when it rises to the level of mind, what are the experiences associated with it, and the deepening of those again in layers similarly. And all these, finally, he will say in the last paragraph, all these, however, are circumstances of the lower triple world of our being. Our being is much more and much larger and higher. The Trailokya of the ancient sages. Living on these, we are, whatever the enlargement of our powers and our consciousness, still living within the limits of the cosmic gods and subject to the reign of the Prakriti over Purusha. To achieve real freedom and mastery, we have to achieve real freedom and mastery, we have to ascend to a yet higher level of the many platoed mountain of our being. So, in these relationships, you will recall the earlier discussion, each world is distinguished by the relationship of the consciousness and the power of consciousness, Purusha and Prakriti, or soul and nature. In all these three layers, nature predominates soul. So, although in the mind we have a sense of freedom, it's not a true freedom. It is still conditioned by the very nature of our mental awareness, which we will explore next time. For true freedom, then we have to rise to consciousness which is entirely free of Prakriti, and that becomes the next chapter, the ladder of self transcendence. So we pause here and we will continue this next Friday. We can take up any comments or questions. Hmm?
Several years ago, and I had the bike, and sometimes petrol disappears. You let the bike outside, and there is less petrol in. So I had this fantasy, there is a snake on the tank protecting my bike. And it was kind of fun to have this fantasy in the back of my mind. So there is this snake.
Mhm.
Till the moment I was driving, and then I thought there's a cable loose. And this cable had a zigzag on his back. So that was a snake. It was not on top of the stick, it was not half on the knee, but it was there. So I stopped and the snake, I ran away, and I also, but I came to fantasy.
Mhm. Mhm.
So kind of,
Interesting.
it just happened.
Yes, yes. So if you look at all these seven categories of experiences which he has described, something of these seven is always happening. So you have in your the very nature of your desire impulse an influence in the environment which tends to actualize or at least nudges things in that direction. Except it's not done very effectively because our life energy and its influence is also quite weak because we are mostly bound in the physical body. And a lot of it happens unconsciously. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I want to I mentioned one thing about looking. You had mentioned one sometime earlier about looking you a mirror and some stuff like that. And
Mhm.
look in the mirror. I mean, I had some kids like this younger, like you keep staring at yourself in the mirror for a while and get a weird kind of a feeling.
Yes.
Is it something like you're kind of getting to realize that you're not identified with your face or something like that?
Yes. So when you stare at your image in the mirror, after a while it can get quite disconcerting.
Yeah, exactly.
Because somewhere in the consciousness, a kind of a dissociation begins to happen. Because you're seeing it yourself, but as if in front.
Yes.
And the dissociation can reach a point where it becomes even dangerous. Because what's happening at that point is the dissociation is opening you to perception of something which is opening to the vital worlds. And what they say is when people stare in the mirror long enough, even your form begins to get changed and get distorted. And it's not a nice thing to see because it brings all kinds of. It's not nice. It's scary, but it brings all kinds of negative suggestions which you identify with because the image was yourself. In fact, the mirror, or sometimes water, or any reflective surface, is used in many occult practices as a way of seeing into other worlds. And the idea behind that is look at a mirror. It's like a window opening into a mirror image of your world, isn't it? You can look behind the mirror, oh, there's nothing. It's like a window. Exactly. And so that becomes naturally a symbol of a gateway to another world. And if it is done in the right way, which in the occult practices, they will give you methods to protect yourself, to put a boundary that nothing negative can come through. The mirror itself is as if detoxified or some positive presence infused. Then it becomes almost like a gateway through, like you would look in a telescope at another planet out there, or through a microscope at things which are not of your domain. You look through the mirror and into subtle worlds, and sometimes they can be beautiful scenes, etc., if it's done with a consciousness which is turned to the positive. But left to itself, it can be disconcerting, and one is advised not to do things like that.
Yes, yes. I never used to do it for long.
Yes.
Another similar thing, like not similar, but another childhood experience, like lying in bed sometimes, not asleep, but just lying in bed with eyes closed, say, like, getting ready to sleep.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes me and even one brother of mine used to have an experience where we discussed with each other, like, look, I can't describe it very well, but like the body slowly expanding or something that you
Yes.
never going to expand.
Yes.
Is that also one of those things that many people
Yes.
experience?
It is a normal experience. When you begin to fall asleep, your consciousness shifts from this gross body to the subtle body. And at that point, the subtle body is much larger than your physical body. It's more fluid, it's more free, light, doesn't experience weight. So, if you are able to hold the thread of awareness as you fall asleep, then you'll find yourself drifting into the subtle body, and there's a sense of floating or expansion or lightness and a loss of boundary, etc., which come in with the subtle body. But generally, by the time you get there, you slip into the loss of consciousness or enter dream state. But the same entry could be made consciously by a training,
Okay.
and then you're not sleeping, you sit down and you shift your awareness into the subtle body and you experience its lightness and freedom. Or you can separate and wander off in what they call out of body experience.
Okay. Thank you.
Many normal people, normal, I call them those normal, low and not they are concerned about the events right now. It's
Mhm.
happening everywhere. So every corner is really fire and on. So what advice would you give to normal people, what call power, don't know how to calm down, how to make it more peaceful, how to make contribution that those tensions can be dissipated? Just as for people who are
Yes.
very concerned and very to give them somehow a tool what they can do.
Yes. Recognize that whenever there is that agitation out there in the world, whether as wildfire or warlike strife somewhere, or riots somewhere else, or whatever form it may take, or disease or famine or hurricanes, whatever form it may be, Whenever there's a disturbance out there, something of that agitation reflects within us because we are the microcosm. And if you're not conscious, you will realize suddenly there are more quarrels with people around you, more misunderstandings. Because you're not conscious, it happens. But when you're conscious, you notice, there's something within me that's agitated. Now, once you've got that, you have the power here to influence. If this is the result of that, then this is your link. If in this agitation I can bring a calm, I can bring an optimism, I can bring a light and a peace, I can give to it a positive form for the future, it will have its ripple effect on the circumstances outside. Of course, your will and your change is not enough to change that totally unless you have already an opening to the wider universal consciousness. But that what you do here is enough to add an influence. And if enough of us do that, our combined influence can be quite significant. In any case, that's the only thing you can do. So that much we should do.
This central idea of using the energy of the will to infuse the life force into the body is very appealing. But there seems to be another way to use this in healing. It should be something that's taught to all physicians, all healthcare practitioners, how to use this
Yes.
for their patients and how to heal.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit?
Yes. So, inevitably, just as I said, every businessman who is successful has a strong vital energy or has instinctively the ability to wield his vital energy. So, it is with doctors. The doctors who are most effective in cure are the ones who are at least unconsciously able to direct their life energy in a positive way, and ideally, consciously, they're able to direct that. The very fact that the doctor walks in and meets the patient with a positive vibration and full vitality triggers the healing process in the very first contact, even without a word being said, without any medicine being said. Doctor, since you walked in, I feel more confident. And doctor says, don't worry, I have seen 100 cases, you'll be well. And I know at that moment in my body that I will get well, because there's already been a transmission of his vitality and his conviction into me. Unfortunately, this is not consciously taught, but most doctors tend to pick it up because they sense that when they are depleted or tired or pessimistic, things don't work out. The healing is not effective. And so, subliminally, unconsciously, they tend to always at least make a pretense of positive messages. But if you're conscious, you can do much more, and then you realize your energy is not enough. You can invoke a still higher energy and a higher power, which can make for the miraculous healings.
This moving to the vital world,
Mhm.
when the vital world is full of many powers and so many things, how safe it is?
Mhm. The question was, how safe is it in this opening to the vital worlds? As long as your consciousness is still rooted in the narrow ego sense, any engagement with other powers of the vital is dangerous, to say the least, but also makes you vulnerable by the very fact that you're aware of them, they are able to exercise an influence on you. And that's why what he's describing here, first of all, has many 7 gradations which he has described of it. But the essential process of disengaging from the physical is absolutely necessary. You may not consciously want to develop access to the vital worlds. You may move on to the mental poise, and even there only to the extent that is necessary for your work, and then move as rapidly as possible to the higher spiritual center. Or if before you have begun this, there has already been a certain foundation of spiritual sensitivity and the deeper soul's ex- ex- mm, influence, the psychic influence within you, then as you go through this ascent of the levels, you will be always protected by the inherent discrimination which comes with the psychic. It feels okay, not more. This is not comfortable. You focus on the next step. But this shift is inevitable for everybody. You may not pause so much on the vital, but as I said earlier, even in the basic training of culturing, we are mentalizing ourselves to some degree. But if we do not complete that, we do not have the ability to exercise a complete mastery. If you look at some of the techniques or processes described in Raja Yoga or in Buddhist practices, and the two are very similar, where you center yourself more and more in the mind, you're really doing this, but using various methods and techniques. You don't realize how you have actually shifted yourself. But instead of doing the indirect method, you could have used this direct method, gathering, becoming aware, and pulling yourself up, shifting, and centering yourself here. Then the deepening to access the mental world, you may not take to its full culmination. You would rather move down to the still higher plane. From above, from the liberated spiritual consciousness, you may turn back and embrace the full range of the universal mind and universal vital and the planes associated and those experiences to the extent relevant.
Vital for dangerous person, and his sleeping is a difficult.
Maybe, we cannot say. I remember once we were studying Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, where Ashwapati is going through these different worlds. And there was the passage, a whole canto, which described the lower vital worlds. And during that time, when we were studying that, every time there was some problem with the amplifier, with the electronics, some lights, and we crossed that, and the problem stopped. So it does happen, but in a very mild way. When you think of things, you connect to them. If you think of problems, you tend to attract them also. Mother, in the same context, because the astrological influences are also at the level of the vital primarily. So Mother says, when you pay attention to the astrological planets, well, they also pay more attention to you, and then you come under their influence more effectively. And the nature of the vital world is precisely the nature of energetic closeness. So when you pay attention, you have become close. When you ignore, then you are far. The thing may be right there, but when you ignore it, it's as if it's not there. That's why people who are very skeptical have a natural immunity to these kinds of things. Those who believe in black magic and all that and are thinking about it, they are much more vulnerable to those kinds of negative things. So, the next paragraph, which we will take up next time, he begins, but all this belongs to the inferior grades of spiritual experience, and indeed is hardly more spiritual than the physical existence. All you did was shifted up, but the same things, same conflict, same ego, same problems are all there. We have, in the same way, to go yet higher and raise ourselves into the mental self. And we will see all that next time. Yes.
During the meditation night, we go out and I don't know how to bring it back again from that to something because we think people are in the world and in the light
Oh, I see.
in the outer world. So after go to many places,
Uh-huh.
sometimes we have to come back and bring it to our
Okay.
inside or just leave it.
Okay. Her question has to do with a practice that she does with a group of friends connecting on the internet, that they meditate together. So it's as if at that moment you feel yourself connected with all these people around the world, and there is an intention at least for humanity and things like that. So the question is whether after that you have to come back to your center.
Is there a station there, or you have to bring the energy together in the
Yes. So I would suggest experiment with both. What happens if you leave yourself in that widened state and then re enter your life? What happens when you come back into your individuality and re enter your life? Experiment with both and see, and then find out what works for you as more valuable. There are some people who naturally acclimatize themselves to living in a consciousness which is much more wide, or even they need to do that. And then there are some who need to come back to a safe personal boundary to feel protected. Since a lot of this is at the level of the mind and a prayerful state in the mind, I don't see any obvious danger. Okay, yes, that's fine. Yes, yes. One can eventually live in a consciousness which feels as if one with the whole world. And you still have a center of action here, but you live in something much wider. Mhm.
We have been studying about heightening the consciousness and the widening the consciousness. So, how to be clear about that? It is getting high, or it is widening, and what are the keys for
The question is, how do you know it is the consciousness is wide or higher?
it is a heightening?
In the experience. Where do you feel your awareness? Is it I'm here, or do you feel the sense of wide, expanded awareness? That's the sense of widening. The sense of heightening is of a different character. The whole grade of awareness is much finer, more subtle, more pure, clear. It feels more bright, more transparent. And the experience is your evidence. The question would be more relevant if you asked, is it as wide as it can be? No, it's not, because it can be much more. Is it as high as it can be? No, it's not. Whatever experience you have is only a beginning. But the sense of wideness and even a quality of height can be had on all levels. Even on a physical level, you can experience a wideness. In the vital level, a wideness. In the mind, you can have a wideness. And recall what he said earlier, our experience of mind and vital is the mental and vital plane within the physical. So even in your mind, you project yourself and try to feel the whole world. That's in the physical plane, the part that turns to mind. It's not the mental plane proper. You're not directly experiencing the realm of thoughts and the substance of thought. It is the physical turning to a mentalized physical awareness. And so you can experience this wideness on all levels. None of it in itself is spiritual. It is only when you enter the consciousness in which there is oneness, which is indivisible, then you have entered the spiritual. And then that wideness has to fill the mind's wideness and the vital and eventually the physical. So, a certain widening of your container of personality is good, but the goal is as quickly as possible to get to the true sense of the influence of the spirit, the self, and let that fill your container. And that's when it will have a spiritual value. And with it, the sense of the ego will begin to thin. Otherwise, simply this widening, often the ego sense becomes as big as your wideness. My ego is as big as the universe now. The immersion of the ego in the consciousness of the spiritual has this sense of I'm a part of the divine, and the losing of sense of separateness and the joy of immersion in the divine. That would be the base of the true wideness of the spirit to settle in us.
if the ego is as big as you, is everything is you, so it's same as under this big.
No, it doesn't disappear. The problem of ego, when it becomes as big as the universe, well, it's never as big as the universe. It's as big as your idea of the universe. And there's always the much more that you don't know about, but you think you know it all. So,
Actually, Bhagavad Gita it is already mantras and Gayatri mantra in rivers
Mhm.
and Ganga in the mountains and Himalaya, this and that. So he's saying I'm this, I'm that, I'm that. So it is about universal ego.
No,
What he says. So
no, it is very much in the physical world that he's describing these things. And he's only describing how the in each domain of reality or of nature, there is something which excels and represents the highest possibility. So, among mountains, this is the highest mountain. Among animals, this is the highest, most developed. Among plants, this is the most conscious plant. So, when Sri Krishna is describing these things, it is in the context of the epitome and the height in the evolution on those various levels of organization in the universe. But you can't say the rest is not the divine. The rest is equally the divine. But it is in these highest that the divine is most expressed. So in the flower, the divine expresses beauty much more effectively than, let's say, in the stone, where resilience or rigidity is much more expressed. Hardness is expressed there. But the divine is everywhere and expresses in all things. In consciousness of the divine or the aspect of divinity of the divine, less in these, more in that. In beauty, the divine expresses much more truly its divinity than in ugliness. But you can't say the ugly object is not essentially divine, isn't it?
it's either nothing is divine or everything is divine.
Yes, but in the expression, some things express more the divine than others. This is the distinction that Sri Krishna is making when he says, I am this and I am that. Very well. Oh.